So I'm just here to introduce the next session. And our next session is a panel. The panel is about how to ensure a just transition while achieving net zero. And chairing the panel, we have Lídia Cabral, who will she'll first give an introduction to social justice and just transition, and what do we mean? Just transition, we hear the term getting thrown around more and more frequently, following sort of the way of sustainability, resilience more recently, and I think it deserves a little bit of an interrogation. What do we mean by that? And we'll invite our panel members as well to reflect on what a just transition means from the perspective of the communities that they work with. But to introduce Lídia Cabral, she's a research fellow at the International Development Studies. Thank you. And her current research interests focus on the interface between justice, equity, and sustainability in food systems. She's researching at the moment how rewilding in the UK can integrate food justice with nature recovery goals. And she also partners with action research networks in Brazil and the UK to strengthen territorial food equity. So Lídia, if you'd like to come up to the stage.
I think I have my lapel mic.
Perfect.
I think it's working. I can hear my voice. Hello, good evening almost. This is the last session of the day. I hope you still have some energy. We have a really exciting panel. So thanks for staying with us. So I'm at the Institute of Development Studies in the south of the UK. We're based at the University of Sussex. I'm a research fellow there. I work on food systems, touching on issues of equity, justice, and sustainability. Most of my work has been in places like Brazil and Mozambique. Mozambique is where I started my career. Is the sound all right? Yeah? But increasingly, I've been engaging with justice and equity issues in food systems here in the UK, and I've been very lucky to be granted some funding to do the work that Angelina has just described. So thanks very much for the funding and for this opportunity to chair this panel on this important topic. I just wanted to say that just before I introduce our distinguished panel, I wanted to just, as a way of providing a little bit of context to what we're going to be talking about, just going through a few issues. So if I could have the next slide, please. Well, we've been talking about achieving net zero. Of course, needless to say that when we talk about net zero in the context of food systems, this is about emissions, it's about biodiversity, soil health, clean water, food miles and waste, the list would go on. But what I want to emphasize here is the need to do that inclusively. So if you click the next, for the next bit of the slide, please, if you click again, yeah. So we need to, of course, think about and discuss what food systems are there for. What is the purpose of food systems? And from where I sit, from where my work tells me, of course, they have an important social function to play in terms of feeding us all. Feeding us all with dignity, and feeding us all in a way that doesn't cause negative impacts to the planet. So I think I want to center our attention on the purpose of food systems and the need to have food systems that deliver for everyone, deliver affordable food, whereby people have dignified access to food, healthy diets, and diets that are produced in a way that is sound for the environment. But this is not happening And in the slide, I'm showing you evidence that food systems in the UK are not fit for purpose because, in addition to the environmental damage that they cause, that we've been talking about, they're also not fitting everyone. Food insecurity has been rising. It's quite shocking to quite shocking levels. Food banks have been rising very considerably. We were just hearing from colleagues in the previous discussion about experiences in different parts of the UK. We have an obesity crisis, and we now have a cost of living crisis, which has impacts on accessibility and the types of diets that people are able to afford. So food inflation is high and it's rising despite the fact that that inflation is starting to come down, perhaps not for long. But we have a problem. We have a problem that our food systems are not providing for everyone. So in this context, we need to talk about just transition. So if we could have the next slide, please. So we need to talk about justice in this transition, and just transition has been broadly referred to incorporating justice in transition away from fossil fuels, of course, and the concept has been around for a long time, but it has recently gained popularity again in global and national debates concerning net zero targets and addressing climate change more broadly. Now, the literature, of course, has been, scholars have been engaging with the concept of justice and just transition for a long time. Of course, in the origins, when we talked about justice in connection to human development issues, we talked about distribution of resources and opportunities, and this draws from Marxist thinking and the need to give everyone opportunities to pursue their livelihoods, to have access to material resources. But increasingly the concept has evolved to also bring in other principles of justice, which are about recognizing the positions of different groups and recognizing the fact that certain groups are marginalized from the established economic and political system. So recognizing the different stances of different marginalized groups and then empowering them to have a say in decision making that affects their lives is important. And that's what recognitional justice is about, just recognizing the stances of various marginalized groups. And procedural justice is about ensuring that those who might be marginalized or negatively impacted by certain policies in the transition to a better future have a say in decisions that concern them and ultimately impact them. And then a fourth principle of justice that draws on indigenous thinking particularly, and also attempts to revert the damaging impact of colonialism. It's about restorative justice, and it's about repairing harm done to people and to nature by previous economic, political systems. So a just transition should ultimately result in a society that everyone shares the benefits of climate action. So it should work not only for nature but also for people. This panel will discuss further what just transition means and what justice means from the point of view of different communities our panel members interact with, and we'll come to that in a minute. But just before we do that, I just wanted to leave you with another concept that I think is quite important in trying to address silos in policy and also addressing divides in debates that can be very polarized. So just to give you the example of Rewilding, the project I'm engaging with, this is a field where there's very strong polarization of views and perspectives with, of course, the land sharing, land sparing debate being that big controversial debate that we're all still trying to grapple with. So in the spirit of trying to find a space to bridge the divide and bring everyone together, I wanted to introduce the concept of social ecological justice. If I can have the next slide, please, then. Which is really a relational concept that pushes us to think about ourselves in a completely different way. So this, again, draws significantly from indigenous thought and a different type of human experience where you see oneself as part of nature, not as separate from nature. we tend to represent ourselves as humans as distinct from nature, but the reality is, according to this way of thinking, that we are nature because of the things that we eat and that sustain us come from nature. This is very clear in indigenous societies where people don't really have that conceptual distinction, the separation between self and the nature around them. People are part of nature in that sort of ontology. So it's building from this relational understanding of us in nature, this idea of social ecological transition comes from. And in the words of the Turkish scholar, Yaka, apologies if there are Turkish people in our audience, you can help me with the pronunciation of Özge Yaka. But she says social ecological justice is about recognizing the rights of humans and non-human worlds to live and flourish together in their environments, free from social and ecological destruction and degradation. So how can we incorporate this sort of perspective when we talk about just transition and justice principles? What does it mean, justice in this relational way in which we have the right to be part of nature and not to affect nature because that's also impacting us negatively? So how do we then, from this relational sort of perspective, how can we understand and how can we think about transitions to juster futures that work for people and for nature and for people in nature? So with this short introduction, I want us to move on to hear from our panel members. So I'll move on to introduce the panel. And please, could you please join me here in the podium? So we have Denise Bentley, who's the co-founder and CEO of First Love Foundation. Please join us, Denise. We have Ben Messer, who's a participation and engagement lead for Food Matters, a charity. And we have Ben Edwards here in the middle, who's a dairy farmer, conservationist, and also a student with the University of the West of England. So thanks very much for being here, and I'll go and join them in the table. Sure you're all comfortable? Yeah? So thanks again for accepting to be part of this panel. I'm going to start by asking you to say a few words about yourself and then share with us what you think just transition means in your own context, in the communities you interact with. So if we could start, shall we start moving? Yeah, from you, Ben? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ben Edwards. I work in the dairy sector in agriculture. I also am an undergraduate student at the University of the West of England, doing my dissertation on analysing the differences between the Common Agricultural Policy that UK farmers were under when we were part of the EU compared to the ELM, so the Environmental Land Management Scheme that we are under now. I think when it comes to a just transition, I think it's remembering that there's a practical side to when we talk about figures. For example, the 7th carbon budget, when we talk about reducing livestock numbers and when we talk about reducing land, we're reducing livelihoods. You know, there needs to be compensation and long-term security for farmers. And I think it's really important to make sure that the funding is there to be able to do that. And obviously at the moment we have the slogan, public money for public goods, which is really important, but it's making sure that those public goods are not just environmental benefits, but food. Because without food, we can't even begin to discuss all these policies and all these great environmental prospects that we have for the future. So I think it's also really important to be able to connect local communities up as well with education. I think there's a lack of understanding about farming in the normal population. And I think being able to address that to especially children, to say that obviously milk doesn't just fly onto a shelf, beef doesn't just land on your plates, and just making sure that people understand the processes and the restrictions that farmers have to go under. I think a really important thing to note as well is ever since we've left the EU, one of the biggest problems is that British farmers are competing with other countries with legislations that we're no longer allowed to use here. So obviously we have an unfair barrier, especially when we're sending stuff over to the EU, in really high animal welfare and what fertilisers we're able to use, pesticides. So it's making sure that our farmers have the right balance between it all. Another thing that is keeping it local. So for example, abattoirs is really important, and it's something that isn't discussed about enough. And there's a small abattoir discount that lots of abattoirs in England get. And it basically just means that the food which is that always comes onto our plates, the food that we always buy, is at a good rate that we can purchase it. But one of the concerns is that that's going to be well, not wiped away, but potentially reduced. And it's important to be able to look at that small section is able to deal with a lot of different categories of cattle. So, for example, with the smaller abattoirs, they're more likely to take on native breeds. They're more likely to take on horn breeds. It is also better for animal welfare because there's less travelling, and also better for the farmer with regarding time as well. I think another thing, and you all are probably sick and tired of hearing this in the news about inheritance tax, but I think it's important to bring up in the sense of it really is important to realise that even though farmers may get a collective, if you're a married couple, you might get a 3 million relief, but this is a livelihood. I think it's important to note that, and it's important to note that when we talk about ecological processes and ecological benefits that benefits the farmers, I think it's making sure, like for example, at the moment we've obviously got the ELM scheme, the environmental land management, and that obviously incorporates the sustainable farming incentive, the countryside stewardship scheme, and landscape recovery. One of the things, and especially what I hear a lot, is we're having to do a lot more for a lot less. And that is really tough, because we're working 24/7, producing food, and we're getting less money, and it's less sustainable. We want security, and we want to be able to have something where we can plan for the future. I think that's one of the biggest things when developing these schemes, is making sure that there's enough prospect for all different types of farmers to be able to plan a future. And when we talk about all different types of farmers, I don't just mean in the sense of a beef farmer, a dairy farmer, an apple farmer. We also be looking at contractors as well, who might be affected by this. If land's getting taken out of production, where do they come in on it? Another thing that I'd like to say as well before I hand it over is we talk about farmers, but another really important one is to talk about gamekeepers as well. And so I know a lot of people don't like the idea of gamekeepers and shooting, but it's good to recognise that, for example, deer and deer culling, we've got 2 million deer in the UK. 3 of them are invasive. So 2 million deer. We've got 6 species. 3 of them are invasive. 1 of them is naturalised, and the other 2 are native. No apex predators. We need to be managing them. That is definitely a different food source that we could get into. But without gamekeepers and without shooting, we wouldn't have any woods in the UK, or especially England, because it was Henry VIII who introduced them, especially down by my area, the New Forest. They were introduced for hunting. So I think it's really important to remember that the countryside is it's obviously for everybody to benefit from, but it's also good to be able to understand why farmers and gamekeepers, foresters have to do this, and making sure there is a feasible future for them to look at. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks for emphasizing the multiple ways in which farmers are disadvantaged materially, but also not having enough of a voice from what you're hearing. But also thanks for reminding us that when we talk about farmers, we're talking about different types of communities, different profiles, right? So you emphasize farmers, gamekeepers, forest keepers, and so on. So there's different profiles with different needs. So thanks for doing that and engaging with this idea of justice. So let's move on to our next panel member, and please, Denise.
Hi.
A little bit about yourself and how you understand just transition.
You don't want to know about me, really. You don't. No, you don't. So I run a charity called First Love Foundation. We're based in Tower Hamlets in East London. One of the most deprived areas in the country. But I'm going to sort of flip the script a little bit. I'm going to tell you a story. We met Stephen through the bravery of his son, Michael. Michael came to us, and when he came to us, he disclosed that it was the 5th time in 15 years that he had left his home to look for help. We employ a whole household approach. It's through questioning Michael that we heard about about his dad, Stephen, who had no income for a range of reasons. 73 years old, lorry driver, worked all his life, paid into the system. The pandemic years were really difficult for him. Lost his wife, COPD, pancreatic cancer. He turns to the welfare system and says, I'm not well, I need to claim a health benefit. And they said no, 5 times. So by the time he came to us, he's in tears. And when we say that we can help, he falls into even more tears. And we appeal the decision. Within 5 weeks, it's in payment. The difference being that we applied for it and not him. One of the things that we noticed about him was that he was isolated, driven all around the country, probably Europe, but in the intervening years, his world became smaller. So we said, you know what, we'll apply for a mobility scooter. He was just like overwhelmed. And we applied, secured it, but the week before the delivery, he died. Now think about whether any time in those 73 years, he's thinking about climate change or net zero. His poverty was caused by faulty benefit system, policy, and how it's administered. So, we are First Love, and we take a whole household approach to tackling poverty. Anyone that sits in front of us, we ask the reason why they're there, who else is in the household, what are the challenges that they're facing, and we seek to address all of those needs in any way that we can. But the most important thing is that every story is different, for which you need a different set of levers to tackle the issue. So for me, having operated first as a food bank, closed it in 2021, after the pandemic, and been scarred by that whole process, the question here today is about just transition. So I've had a bit of a think. I have some bugbears that my friend here, Ben, will tell you that I have. But 4 main points. As we consider climate change and net zero, I need you to think about the people that have no voice. It's all very well, we're gathered here today to discuss what it means, but for people like Stephen and Michael and many that we meet, it's not even on their radar, but they are being very much impacted by it. From a policy perspective, I've seen over the years as, oh my goodness, people are really struggling, let's throw food at them, when actually they have no income. And I think that to be able to really fundamentally address the root causes of poverty and crisis, it needs a multi-agency, cross-departmental policy approach to tackle work, the NHS, and other barriers that stop people from thriving, even insulating homes as an example. But my real bugbear is the notion of using surplus food to tackle poverty, because it doesn't. You talk to any authentic food bank user, if that's a term, and they will say to you that they don't like going to food banks. Life and success to them is going to a supermarket and buying food like everyone else. But still for all, there is unfettered growth. I cannot believe, I've got to quote this, I spoke to a borough last week in London. There's now 200 food banks in one borough. There's over 100 in Tower Hamlets. So despite the fact that there's food on the shelves and the cost of food, and food banks are struggling to even supply food, there are more being opened every week. So I think it's time to stop. We need to pause and think about what are the root causes of poverty. Some are societal, definitely, but let's pause and let's start talking to those that are living in crisis about the help that they need to escape it once and for all. And finally, bring them to the table, involve them in the discussion for net zero. That's my bit.
Thank you very much, Denise. And last but not least, Ben Messer from Food Matters.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah. That's quite a tough act to follow. I've been sitting next to Ben all day, and he's provided a reality check all day, which is very interesting. Denise, who I work with on a project in London, always brings a reality check, just to really bring it down to some real truths, I think. I think it's important that we listen. And I'll tell you a bit about myself in a minute, but I think if I'm talking about a just transition, it's about listening to people. It's like listening to people who Ben is talking about, and it's about listening to people who Denise is talking about. It's about agency. It's about involving them in process. It's about participation. Bob Doherty, right at the beginning, said it's about the importance of collaboration. Yes, it's all of those things. I work for a charity in Brighton called Food Matters. We're small. We punch above our weight. We look at the transformation of food systems across the UK at all sorts of different scales. We started the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership, which was a pioneer in the idea of bringing people together to look at their food system, to make it more resilient, to make it stronger, and to make it more just. Food Matters is a program partner in the Sustainable Food Places program. Again, looking at a place-based approach to a sustainable food future. And there's a few people here who I've enjoyed bumping into, not expecting to see them, who are from some of those food partnerships. There's 114 of them around the UK. So it's a big network. Every place is different. Every place is taking their own place-based approach, but it's all about participation. It's all about listening to people. It's all about looking at connection and collaboration across our food systems. And that means inclusion. That means properly representing your place. I won't say more now because we're going to get into more of a discussion on it, but that's what a just transition looks like to me.
We'll open up... We'll open up for questions and comments soon, but I have a final round of comments that I wanted to get from you around the concrete steps in engaging with the just transition process and ensuring that in that transition no one is left behind and no one is burdened by the transition, right? Ben, you were highlighting how farmers need to be compensated, how they need to be supported if they are to engage with this transition, in a way that doesn't exclude those who don't have the capital, perhaps, or the opportunities or the connections to be better placed to make the transition. So you've all emphasized in various ways how different groups are marginalized and they can't be left behind, because I think we have a common understanding that food systems have a social function to play, ultimately to feed us all, right? I think we all accept that. So what would be, from each of you, the one step you think you would like to highlight to ensure that no one is left behind or is negatively impacted in the transition towards net zero, which is what this Big Tent is about? So what would be your highlight in that practical step forward to ensure that your group is well represented and is not disadvantaged in the process?
Absolutely. I think with farmers, all they want is for everything to be fair. I think that's the biggest thing, and they want certainty. Because at the end of the day, obviously we've now left the EU, so they're using losing the BPS payment, so the basic payment scheme, and that has been followed with the roll-in of ELMS. I discussed a bit about that earlier. I think one of the problems that we will see with ELMS is that it's still evolving. And the biggest thing is at the moment is that farmers are being squeezed from all different angles and they don't quite know what to do. You've got inheritance tax, you've got lowering BPS payments, and you've got the unpredictable future for them and to be able to plan a future. And it's remembering that obviously, farmers are the one who produce the food. And obviously having a net zero target is vitally important. But I think for the farming community, the best thing would be, and it might not be a particularly popular option, but is pushing back the net zero targets and using some of the fund that is put towards elms to give to farmers to produce our food. It's like when they say, if I use an analogy, when you're on a plane and they say if you crash, you put on your mask first before you help others. We need the government to put on mask on us, the farmers, so we are able to run a feasible, a profitable business, so then we are able to implement these environmental strategies to hit our net zero goals. But we can't do that if we aren't being supported. Now, one of the biggest things is that in 2019 there was the Farming Resilience Fund, which is a £10 million pound ring-fence fund, and that was put in by the Conservatives to help farmers transition through the EU transition period. That has now been stopped as of this month. Some of the things that they have said potentially is looking at the same thing. Is that we got the farming sensitive catchment fund, which is basically looking at 70 parts of England and how they can navigate elms to best make their farm profitable. And then we've got the Farming Investment Fund, which has different capital grants, and it just looks at profitability. But I think it's really important to highlight that these schemes from elms that are needed to be navigated require much further upfront cost, which farmers do not have, and there is a potentially the same, sometimes a bit more depending on the scheme, but potentially less a return for them. So where's the incentive? We need to have an incentive for farmers, because at the end of the day, farmers are the one who are going to be implementing these projects, and without farmers, our net zero, how are we meant to do it? So I think it's really important to remember that, for example, places like this, discussions like this, we need more farmers, because these are the people who are going to be implementing these strategies. And without farmers, it's hard to look at how we're meant to do it and how it's meant to be fair for them. Once again, I'm going to go back to the 7th carbon budget, which was up there earlier, talk about reduced livestock numbers and reduced landscape for agriculture. And obviously, it's important to look at net zero targets. But we really need to maybe start concentrating more about how we can support our farmers through this transition so they are able to implement these projects to give us the best benefit that we can, but there might just be a delay on the net zero targets, which I know no one really wants, but I think it's looking at the practicality of it for farmers, for the people who are implementing it. So that's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Please.
It still comes back to what's happening in the household. Austerity measures were launched about 15 years ago now. And as a result of all of that, what you have today are families that don't have access to social housing. They have to rely on the privately rented sector. Universal credit in London for whole household is £26,000 a year. Rent is £32,000 per year. And so we are seeing families that are now holding rent arrears of about £50,000. They do not have the money to buy food. So I'm a true believer in, if you really want to tackle poverty, find out what the drivers are and respond to them. If we're not able to help lift that household out of poverty, you cannot have a conversation with them about net zero because they can't hear you. Because when you speak to them, their aspiration is, I want to get to the end of the week without anything going wrong. They can't see anything beyond that. So my concern is that they will be left behind. They already are. But in this conversation about making a just transition, it's not even on their mind. And so we need to start with the household. We need to pause the growth of food banks. We need to sit down with policymakers from the Treasury right through to the NHS to really explore and expose the fact that there are people today that want to work, and they've told me that they've been told they've got to wait 5 years for an operation, so they've got to remain on benefits in the meanwhile. So until we address the inequality and the notion that food support doesn't help tackle poverty in any way, shape or form, my real sadness and concern is that they'll be left behind. So we need to take account of that. Does that help?
Yes, Ben. So we have households facing, being completely excluded and just failing to fulfill the most basic human rights of having access to food. And we have farmers who are feeling they're being also left behind and disadvantaged by the system. You talked earlier about place-based approaches and how that's the sort of space in which you operate. Is there a way of bridging the gap between these differently marginalized groups, social groups that Ben and Denise have been talking about? Sorry, I'm a bit improvising here, but because you mentioned place-based approach earlier, and I know that's the perspective you're coming from, is that a place where that connection between farmers that are not being given enough opportunities and households who are really struggling to have access to decent food, is there an opportunity there to build a bridge between differently marginalized social groups?
I completely believe there is, but a place-based approach requires you to represent your place. And in this instance, we're talking about food systems. So food system, the Sustainable Food Places approach and the Food Matters approach is to look at the system in its holistic sense, across the whole food system, from the producers of food through to the people who are transporting it around a place, to the people who are procuring it, who are turning it into meals, caterers, and to the people who are looking at selling it and the people who are looking at actually dealing with the waste, the end product, and whether you can reuse that or whether you actually compost it. So that is the whole food system. You need to look across sectors. You need to look at what's happening in local government and the statutory sector. You need to look at what's happening in business and economies in places. But you need to also involve communities. And if you don't involve communities, you're not properly representing your place. And you're missing out on this word justice. There will be people who aren't involved. There will be people whose voices aren't being heard and don't have a say. And that is something that I've focused on in the Work in Sustainable Food Places programme. I lead on representation and justice. In 2020, with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement rising up, the Sustainable Food Places programme looked at itself and said, what are we going to do about this? And it's very difficult. We've got a wide network. We've got 114 now different food partnerships around the UK. And we thought, let's do a co-development, a participatory process to find out from our people, our networks around the UK, what do we do about this? And we listened and we worked and we developed a working group and we co-developed a process to take steps to try and address racism, basically, in the food system. We called it Ready for Change, Race, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion in the UK food system, looking at a place-based approach in the food partnerships and saying, where do we start? We look at ourselves, we listen to the people in our place, we ensure that we represent, and we developed, as a group, a co-development process, very participatory, a tool to help these food partnerships self-reflect, to think about their culture, what they believe in, what their vision is, to think about their practice, what they actually do as food partnerships, and to think about people, their people, who's involved in their leadership, who's involved in the participatory processes that go towards building a sustainable food future. Ready for Change, the Ready Review tool, it's, if you want to see it, it's on the Sustainable Food Places website in the toolkit. It's something that's been used by a number of different food partnerships around the country to help take that first step of having conversations, and this is about race. We're now looking at broadening to look at diversity, equity, inclusion more broadly, to look at representation more broadly. Where are the young people? Do we hear their voice? Where are the people who are excluded because of poverty? Do we hear their voice? Where are these households that we're hearing about from Denise? Where are the households? Where is that approach built into our process? How do we represent that? I have an ask, which is if we really are serious about a just transition, why not say that? I think I just read the heading on the question that we were just deliberating over in our breakout rooms there, and I think if I wrote it down right, how to transition to sustainable and resilient future for UK agri-food systems. If we really believe that justice is important, why not say that? Why not say just as well? A resilient, sustainable, just transition. Do what you believe is right, actually, in this instance, and put it in your title. I don't think there can be a sustainable food future unless it's a just food future. They are intimately entwined. You can't have one without the other. So say that.
And I just taking the chance to thank the organizers and Angelina for bringing this panel together, because I think it just shows the importance of perhaps enlarging the big tent to include then the perspectives of the various communities that might be affected, impacted, and left behind in the transition. So I think it's really important to do that, and thank you for bringing those perspectives here. We have about 20 minutes, just under 20 minutes left, so we'll take a few questions. Let's hope to do a couple of rounds. So I'll take 3-4 questions in this first round, and then give the panel a chance to respond. We have, someone here, there, and here, so we have 4. The gentleman over there.
First of all, thank you for some great insights. I work at a university, which some people see sometimes as an ivory tower, but we do deal with a lot of young people from very diverse backgrounds. I'm at a brand new university in Peterborough, and I would say at least 60% of our students are from the local environment because they've never had the opportunity to go to a higher education institute before. We see 2 big problems, particularly with young people, and I wanted to get the reactions of the panelists on them. The first is young people just not getting paid enough for the work they do. They're on the minimum wage, and the minimum wage for people under 21 seems pitiful sometimes when you find out what they're doing, these young people. And they're having to work to make ends meet as students, so they've got no options, some of them. So their families can't support them. They're encouraged to go to higher education, they've got to work at the same time, but they're not paid well. And the other is mental health, particularly amongst what we sometimes describe as the COVID generation, those that were locked in the most important parts of the development, the psychological development. And I would say I'm going to describe it as wasting time, but waste in the sense of I could be doing something else if I wasn't dealing with the mental health problems of the students. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I value having to help them, but that's time taken out of the day when I could be doing something else with the students rather than dealing with mental health problems. And I'm not necessarily qualified to deal with them anyway. So yeah, I'd really like to hear what the panel has to say about those 2 issues, please.
Thank you. There's Dable at the back, in the black top,
Are you taking a range of questions now? Yeah. Firstly, thank you all for speaking. This has been my favourite session of the day by far. Each of you have a really good insight into a group of people, a range of people that are struggling. So we've been talking a lot about what needs to change and how it needs to change. So if each of you could, and for me it probably is about funding, but it might not be. If each of you could just change one thing now what would be the next thing? If it was like the government, I can make the government fund this tomorrow, that would make a difference, or I can change this structurally tomorrow. What's the thing?
Thank you. And there was another one at the back, yeah? Then we'll come to this side of the room in the next round.
The same as the nice lady over there. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been really lovely to hear. I just wanted to mention animals. With being a just transition, obviously you've mentioned about marginalised communities, but I've not heard anybody speak about the animals. And obviously they're a huge actor within the system, whether they're the ones that are farmed or affected by how we use the land that they're farmed on. So I'd just like to hear how the speakers would also think about including animals within a just transition.
Thank you. And final question of this round up here in the front, and then we'll come to the other side of the room in the next round. So I'm just here.
Yes, thank you everyone again. My question is about the tensions between a just transition and a rapid transition. So I think a lot of today was, how do we quickly push to net zero? And as a lot of you mentioned as well, a just transition often means participatory processes. So if you can reflect on, do you think, are there any tensions between reaching 2050 net zero and actually, as sort of Ben mentioned, do we need to allow more time for participatory processes in policy and in research?
Thank you all for the excellent questions, and quite diverse as well. So we have youth, we have animals, we have the one thing you would change tomorrow, and those tensions between the things you described that are very challenging and multidimensional, and the need to show quick action towards net zero. So shall we go in reverse order now, perhaps, and start this side of the table, and you can pick on the ones that you think are more relevant for...
We can try.
Yeah.
I'm going to, first of all, the gentleman at the front there talking about, the students talking about poverty and talking about mental health and mental well-being, that are quite obviously connected as well. I think we need to sort of acknowledge the connection between the two there. I think I would probably suggest that Denise may have more to say on what you were talking about there as well. But I think it is about poverty. I think we have to address poverty if we're going to be talking about engagement in this process, about agency in affecting our food systems. We have to tackle poverty. It's a bit of a no-brainer, I think. The one thing that I would change, fund food partnerships. It's a struggle to keep the Sustainable Food Places programme going. I believe in the approach, as I've been saying. I believe that there is a point to connecting up food systems and representing places and working on a place-based approach. And I think the government should, as the Welsh government has done, in England and in Scotland, and it has in Scotland as well. But I think in England we need to have proper funding for food partnerships going forward, just to sort of try and embed this in the way that our food system is working. Again, I'm not going to say anything about animals and their role in the just transition. I'm not really qualified to talk about that. Ben may have more to say on that. Food for the Planet is something, it's a campaign run by Sustain as part of the Sustainable Food Places programme. And I know that the focus in that campaign is on less and better when it comes to meat in particular, less and better. And I think better needs to include something around animal husbandry and, if you like, the justice for animals in the process. Allow more time as well. I think, yes, we do need to sort of take steps one at a time. Someone said in the breakout room in the other room where I was that work out where we want to get to and then look at the steps to get there. And this is part of what this alliance is doing, what the network is doing. We need to take steps one at a time. It's a big deal. We can't do it all in one go. So be patient and take steps, and that may mean we need more time. I'll hand on.
I'll cover 2 points. Well, 3, I think. The animal thing, I don't know. So, right. So about the students that you work with, I'd say the problem goes even broader than that. I visited a project a couple of weeks ago that's a food project, social pantry, and they told me that out of 100 people they serve every week, 9 are suicidal. There's not a week that goes by that we're not dealing with 2 or 3 safeguarding cases. I don't think enough time has been spent considering the impact of the pandemic that has given you the students with mental health issues that they have. I don't think enough time has been given to think about employment policy. So for example, you have students that are on low pay. Why can't you use the apprenticeship levy through employers to be able to pay an appropriate wage and also give a qualification at the end of it that sets them on an upward trajectory, in my opinion. I think there's lots of things that are being missed in the middle of all of this, but mental health is a really big issue from children. I've met 3-year-old suicidal children right through to adults, and if we don't do something, then what does a future workforce look like? So I think we need to address employment policy. We need to better leverage the apprenticeship levy and encourage employers to pay an appropriate wage. The money is there, it's just that it's not being used in an appropriate way. And we need to invest in mental health services, but of course the country's broke. Services are stretched, and that's the challenge all over. We should not have to deal with mental health issues, but I have to now build a team that are skilled in health and social care and mental health and domestic abuse, and we're a specialist legal advice service. It's not really within our purview, but we need to, because those are the problems that they present with. If I was in charge, I think you all know what I'd do. But anyway, I'd stop funding food banks a little. I know you work in food. But I would pour all of the resources, if you think about how much money is spent on surplus foods, on food banks, anything emergency food related, what if that was turned around into accessing services like ours, where we sit down and we say, how are you? And all the problems that they're facing, give them the support to solve all those issues, because ultimately you want to help them become economically inactive, whether it's volunteering or even work or even education. But it helps move that family from this cycle of poverty that they are just living in over the years into, we can breathe again, we can shop at a supermarket, we can pay for where we live, we're no longer in debt. But sadly, people's lives have been so blighted that they just cannot see the future. If I was in charge, I'd like to change that.
I think it's quite tough to follow up on that. Very good. I think with the pay for people under 21, so I am 21, but I don't think I'm the best person to talk about it, since pretty much everybody in agriculture don't really get a particularly great pay for the hours. But that then leads me on to the next thing, is mental health. Mental health is probably one of the worst things in agriculture. And there was a study, more of a survey, by the Farmers Weekly, that said everybody under the age of 40 thought that an underlying mental health issue is one of the biggest challenges in farming today. And I think it's so true. When you think about what farmers have to do, they wake up, say for example a dairy farmer or an arable farmer or any farmer, they wake up at any time of any hour to look after, or for example the livestock, to look after the livestock. They can't do it themselves, livestock. I think it's important recognising that farmers, go through isolation. They don't have the time for a social balance. Well, a lot of them don't. There are the varies. I know there's stories about arable farmers going skiing, but obviously they well deserved after harvest. But I think it's a real big thing in agriculture to think that. So on my last farm, I was down in Devon. We were grazing all year round, but also we were spring block calving. So we'd have about 330 calves within about 3 months. And when you're out there at night, so we used to do night checks, so split it off. So as a group of 3 of us, we were managing a herd of 320 cows, milking on a parlour called 24 by 48 swingover. So it just means that you've got 2 rows, cows coming on both sides, and you swing over the units. But it's really important. One thing that I know that I suffered from down there is because I moved away from my family. I also did this while doing studying, so spring calving was right in the middle of exam season for me. And doing night checks was another thing as well. And so sleep isn't something you could count on during spring calving, and you just don't know what's going to happen. But you've got to be there for the animals. Because the reason why we do it, or the reason why I do it, is because I love cows. You know, I love my animals, and I'll do anything for them. And I think there's also the misconception, especially in dairy farming, that we mistreat our cows, and that's furthest from the truth. You know, we love our animals, and we do everything we can to support them. But mental health is, definitely a big one. The question about what would I change? I know you said don't say funding, but it is funding. Do say funding. Well, it's definitely funding, because I think that's the biggest thing at the moment, is the sense of we got a certain amount of money that is put towards environmental projects and towards farming, and a large proportion of it is towards elms. And once again, I think that's a fantastic thing, because obviously we need to be hitting net zero targets, but it also needs to be funding to show farmers that they don't have to choose between food production and environmental projects. They need to work side by side. Farmers, whatever the type, conservationists, ecologists, we all want the same thing. We all want farming to work in harmony with the environment. But it's tough, especially when you think about the hours that farmers do. But it's also tough when we don't feel like we have a voice, which I know we've talked about a little bit. And I think one of the biggest things for farming at the moment, which also going back to the mental health side, is the transparency as well regarding everything. I think it's having the transparency around from DEFRA about what they're going to do with these schemes. So, for example, in Elms, you can have a capital grant scheme. That got abruptly stopped last November, stopping 4,000 applicants, putting 4,000 farmers in cash flow limbo. And think about how that would make any of you guys feel, in the sense of, say, for example, imagine this: you've got a farm, and you're running it on very, very, very thin margins, to the point where sometimes you're not even making above 1% capital every single year. And you don't know where it's going to go, you don't know where geopolitics are going to take you, and suddenly the government has brought in a new scheme, and one of the schemes that is open to most farmers, because they weren't apparently prepared for the amount of applicants, they close it. So they have opened it back up with some pretty good prospects of farmers, but the point of that is that there needs to be more transparency from DEFRA to farmers about where the policies are going to go, and farmers need to have more of a voice on that. Now for the next question, which I think is actually quite hard to answer with the animals and in just transition, I think it's looking at welfare for the animals, and it's looking at where we take them. So, for example, in dairy farming, I think one of the things that I don't agree with, and most dairy farmers don't agree with, is that we have a new additive to add to our feed. We're not all dairy farmers, but if we supply to Arla, we have a new additive called Bovea, and that is basically an additive that has come over from the EU, where we put it into the cattle feed, and it stops the cows from farting, pretty much, from producing methane. Now, I know we've already discussed that methane is obviously highly potent towards climate change. But another thing to remember is that it is a short-lived greenhouse gas. It lives in the atmosphere for 12 years. And also, we've got to remember as well is that that's another chemical going into our food system as well, to our food cycle. So, what does that mean for us as well? Also, we've got to think about when these animals secrete out and whatever they do in the fields. We haven't really had a long enough time to evaluate what impacts that could have on water bodies, on soil structure. So I think it's really important with animals to look at the welfare and about what we're giving to them. And I think abattoirs is a very big one as well. Like I said before, obviously abattoirs, the small abattoirs have the discount. Some of them up to 90% of their funds comes from that fund. And I think that's really important for locally sourced food and for animal welfare and for time for farmers. And I think it's making sure that we look at the all picture. It's not just farmers, but it's also abattoirs, once again, gamekeepers, contractors. It's everybody, it's a circle. We all work together. And we, as farmers, need to work with you guys to make these policies work, because we want the same thing. So I think it's really important that we get more farmers to these types of things. I'll definitely be spreading the word because it's important. Yeah.
Thanks very much, and thanks for giving such comprehensive answers to the questions. I had promised I would come to this side of the room, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So perhaps you can use the drinks to ask questions and reach out to the panel members. I just wanted to close the panel by just a few very quick highlights. I think this discussion brought a human face to the net zero conversation. We talked a lot about empowerment, agency, understanding the positions of marginalized groups and bringing them to the fore. But we're also hearing about the intimate relation between farmers and nature, right? I think that connects to the idea of social ecological justice, right? Of how we see people in nature, and you gave us a good example of that from your own experience of interacting with animals and caring for them. And you also talk about these false trade-offs and having to choose between food and environment. Perhaps we have to find the common ground and look at those interconnections rather than separating things. So I hope you found this panel useful. I think it brings another layer to the many layers of challenges that we've been talking about, but it's an important one, and one that reminds us of why food systems are there for. And I think we need to be constantly reminded of that purpose and adding a justice and equity element into our discussions all the time. So thank you very much, and enjoy the next session, which I think is going to be drinks, involving drinks. So that sounds great.
Thank you so much, Lydia and Denise and Ben for all of the discussion. These issues are really, really important to continuously consider as we discuss how do we get to net zero. It's making sure that we have representation within these discussions, and as always within the network, we're always looking for new ways to work together and to improve the way that we operate as well. And we've got a champion this year, Runak, who is also, the focus of their work is to help ensure that we are being more inclusive and representative in the work that we're doing and the engagement work that we'll be looking to do over the next 6 months.